Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today's going to be kind of a funny one. We're going to a grave, but I'm only going to tell you crazy and funny stories. We are going to the man who many people and many of his peers called the greatest country music singer of all time, George Jones. And we're going to talk about all the crazy stories that happened throughout his life that made him even more of a legend than his beautiful voice even did. Johnny Cash once said, George Jones taught me how to laugh at myself through all the bad times, especially when they were self-inflicted. These are Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. Hello again, Nashville's most famous cemetery. Thank you for the invitation, George. Don't mind if I do. George Jones has this gigantic plot right here, as he should. Much like Hank Williams has a gigantic plot where he's buried. All the greats deserve it. This is amazing. This is a beautiful plot. His wife Nancy will be buried here with him. Nancy was a real godsend to him, in his own words. A lot of people want to believe that Tammy Wynette was the love of his life, but she wasn't, and it was just unfortunate. He always said he thought that Tammy maybe didn't try and understand him, but he was a tough man to understand. It says he stopped loving her today. That was probably his biggest hit. George Glenn Jones was and is the king of broken hearts. He sang of life's hardships and struggles in a way that somehow lightened our own. His voice was effortless and unforgettable. He brought unsurpassed emotional eloquence to every song he sang. He was and is the soul of country music. No one will ever fill his shoes. He is at rest, but his music is alive and ageless. He gifted it to us all, to the joy and the broken. Walk through the world with me, he sang, and we do. Here's a great picture of them in the center as well, George and Nancy. He met her just as he was cleaning up. That's his nickname, the Possum. Married March 4th, 1983. I put a gold band on the right left hand, it says. Now he also has a stone here at the bottom. Then we'll get into some of these crazy stories. Take a look at that. Got him as a young boy. Right there, he said he got his first electric guitar when he was about 9 years old. His dad bought it for him. I mean, his first guitar. He learned how to play from the church ladies. Believe it or not, his mom was a good piano player. His dad was a crazy, hard-working, drinking man. But George's mom liked to play piano in church, and so George would go along with her. And he saw I think he said they were the nuns could play guitar, and so they taught him all the cowboy chords and got him interested in music right away. Then he would lay in bed, he said, on Saturday nights with his mom and pop, and he would listen to the Grand Ole Opry. And he said he would tell his mom, if I fall asleep, wake me up, I want to listen to Roy Acuff. And he said she always would, because he always did fall asleep. Little did he know his love of that music would someday take him to that very stage. So George was born into the area of Saratoga, Texas, which was kind of known as a pretty lawless place, and it was hard to make a living there. So eventually, George and his family moved off to Beaumont. He learned how to play in those early days, but he really fell in love with music in the later days. Once they moved to Beaumont, he would eventually start performing, met a woman, got married, and as soon as she got pregnant, they found out they couldn't live together. They couldn't have a relationship, and so even though he wanted to keep playing music, he actually joined the Marines because he realized he couldn't afford the child support on what he was earning as a musician. So he went off to the Marines, and his whole life he had been a Hank Williams fan. He said Hank Williams was the music that moved him. The very first time when he would hear people around him playing music, it got him excited and he loved it. But when he realized there were people in an outside world making music and making a living off of it, that just blew him away. And Hank Williams was the main guy that he really loved. He loved Roy Acuff as well, but Hank Williams moved his soul. And he said while he was in the Marines, someone brought in a newspaper and set it down in front of him, and the headline was stating that Hank Williams had died. And George said he cried the rest of the day. When he got out of the military, he went back to performing. People liked his voice. He had this amazing ability to go high and then hit a real low note with almost a seamless shift. People said, I mean, all these country guys like Johnny Cash, you name it, everybody in the business, Roy Acuff, they all said, God, I wish I could do what George Jones did. He could make the sounds that I wanted to make. And George would end up having kind of a crazy life, as I mentioned to you. Now, he had the family history of his dad being a pretty hard drinker. And so as George would go out and play these towns and be a road musician, he would fall into that lifestyle as well, being a hard partier. He came from a town, like I said, that people just didn't feel any strange feeling about, fight out of nowhere and then just act like it didn't happen. So he would get into a lot of fights. One night, he was playing a gig, got into a bar fight, got thrown in jail. He called a promoter he knew named Pappy to come bail him out. Pappy came, bailed him out and said, what are you going to do for a living, George? You got to pay me back somehow. He said, I don't know, what can I do? And Pappy said, I'll give you a gig in Houston for $2,500. So George came, played the gig, got his $2,500, and then the next day came to Pappy saying he needed money. Pappy said, well, George, I done called some of the guys you were out partying with last night, and they say you flushed that money down the toilet. George looked at him right in the eye and said, Pappy, that's a damn lie. I only flushed $1,200 of that. George became a very sought-after musician because people just fell in love with his voice. He could do all these things that, you know, other people couldn't do. And one of these crazy times, he was out touring with Buck Owens. They were doing a split bill. And George said he kept telling Buck, let me headline the show. Let me play last. And Buck would always say, no, George, you're better first. Go ahead and play first. So finally one night, George got mad, got drunk, and he goes out, get on stage, and he tells Buck, hey, you better stand on the side and watch my show. So he gets up on stage. Buck says, I watch from the side of the stage. And George Jones proceeds to do my entire show. He does every single song that I would have done. People go crazy. Crowds losing their minds. He comes walking off stage. George looks right at Buck, smiles, and said, your turn. Buck said, I'll never forget that. Looked right in my eye after doing my entire set. So everywhere George went, every contract he had, he was successful. Then he started meeting Tammy Wynette and wanted to perform with Tammy Wynette. Tammy was married, George was married. They were both in kind of bad relationships, but she had a producer that was really good. And this guy said, you know, if you guys would sing together, I think we really have something. And he was right, because George paid an exorbitant amount of money to get out of his contract so that he could join up with them, record with them, and he and Tammy had a lot of hits. But what's crazy about that is George was actually invited to Tammy's house one night for dinner, and her husband called her a name in front of George did not care for, and George realized that he had feelings for Tammy. So he told this story himself. He had a couple of drinks, heard that word be called out, got up, flipped the table over, grabbed her husband, smacked him around a couple of times, and then threw him off the side and said, Tammy, I love you and you love me. Let's get the hell out of here and be together. Grab the kids. Tammy went over, grabbed her kids, and they all took off and they got married. And then George became Tammy's problem, because even though, you know, they seemed to on the surface have a good relationship, they really didn't, because George was at the height of his drug abuse at this time. He was drinking, he was doing pills, he was doing cocaine, he was on the road 200 to 250 dates a year. So when you live on that kind of time frame, that lifestyle, it's hard to come down at night after performing. So these guys would do that, and they would just develop a lifestyle that was hard to live with. So when George, he would tour with Tammy and everything, but he became completely convinced that Tammy was having an affair with Porter Wagoner. And Porter Wagoner had his own show. Porter Wagoner was very popular, and apparently people in Nashville knew that there was rumor that Porter Wagoner was very well endowed. And George thought that he was trying to get with Tammy, so he followed Porter Wagoner into a restroom one time, grabbed him by his endowment, twisted it and said, "Don't you ever touch Tammy or I'll kill you." And Porter Wagoner standing there going, "George, what the hell's the matter with you?" Just one of those crazy George Jones stories. One of his bandmates said, it was this one tour, George had been kind of crazy and he was talking about wanting to go out on the road again. I thought it was probably kind of a bad idea, so I made up an excuse and told him I couldn't go, and I was glad I did, because in the end, I remember reading about in the newspaper how George Jones got arrested for kicking out his hotel windows in Louisiana. He used to get so drunk living with Tammy that Tammy had to hide his car keys, all of his various car keys. One night, she said she went out, he was getting crazy and was talking about going out for more liquor. So she took all of his car keys, he had them all like hanging on a wood slat, took all of them off, threw them out into the night sky so he wouldn't be able to find them. So next thing she knows, he's on a riding lawnmower, riding down to buy himself a case of beer, which he did. And when he had his museum here in town, they had that lawnmower on display. Now, Wayan Jennings was a legendary partier. Everyone in Nashville, pretty much during the 60s and 70s, were really out of control. And Wayan did a lot of the blow. And he said one night he was high on that. George came over way drunk, and they were hanging out, and all of a sudden George started to get belligerent. This is in the days where George wasn't really eating. He was doing all this stuff, and he was almost rail thin. So Wayan says he's getting out of control. He starts yelling at him, calling him a Conway Twitty sounding SOB. And so he said, I finally get tired of it, and I go get a piece of rope, and I hold George down. Well, apparently George's alcohol was stronger than Wayan's, because Wayan said eventually I got tired. He would not stop, so I ended up tying him to a tree in my front yard. Then years later, when just George had went completely out of control, Wayan had completely cleaned up. Wayan said, I remember calling him and saying, George, I know this is going to sound strange coming from me, but don't you think you're a little out of control and you maybe need to reel it in a little bit? Now, also during this time of his excessive partying, he became known as No-Show Jones, where he would arrive in a town to do a gig, and then when they would go to get him to take him to the show, he'd be gone. He'd just go off and walk off somewhere. One of the stories, they said he went and walked off. Road manager said it was always my job to find him, and I always did. He said, I start going up the road, get about, I don't know, a few miles up the road, and I see a couple of ladies sitting out on their porch, and I said, ladies, you didn't happen to see George Jones come by here, did you? And they said, yeah, he came by. He stopped, came up here, had a couple of drinks with us, sat with us for an hour. Then he went off down that way. So he says, so I keep going down the road. I eventually see a motel, and I go up and I start knocking on the doors. And he said, one of the doors opens up, and there stands George Jones in his underwear with his hair a mess and a bucket of chicken under his arm. And he says, oh, damn it, I knew you'd find me, you always do. Now, his band was with him for a very long time. They were with him before he knew Tammy. Then they became kind of George and Tammy's band together. And then when Tammy and George split up, they actually decided to go with Tammy because they just thought it was a little bit safer. But they would tell a story about how during the No-Show Jones days, he actually started having basically an imaginary friend called the Duck. And it became his best friend, and it was actually George speaking in Donald Duck's voice, and they would go back and forth having conversation. They said this went on for like a year or two. And the band member said, I'll never forget one night, George was on the bus, and he and the Duck are fighting. And he yells up to the driver, pull this damn bus over. He pulls the bus over, and he throws the Duck out, tells him to get off the bus. He said, we start driving down the road. About 3 minutes later, all of a sudden, George started feeling bad. He yelled to the bus driver, turn around, let's go back and get the Duck. He's my best friend. It was also said a lot of the time during this time, George would just take off in his car and not come home. He would end up living in the car. I remember Terry Jennings, Wayan's son, said he remembered running into him while he was walking down 17th Street. George pulled up in a car, saw Terry, knew him because of Wayan, popped his trunk and just pulled out a vial of cocaine and gave it to Terry. Terry said he had just a box of just vials of cocaine in the back of his trunk. He said, and I looked down and he's got a license plate made out of cardboard. It says George. And I said, what's with that? And he goes, all the fans keep stealing my vanity plates and I'm tired of going to the DMV and replacing them. So I just decided to put that on there. Cops keep pulling me over, telling me I gotta get a real plate, but I'm not going to. Then, you know, during one of those stories I heard while he was living in the back of his car, he actually had a cardboard cutout of Hank Williams, and he and Hank and the Duck were roommates there for a while. George became so famous for his drinking that there was actually, and it still circulates widely to this day, a video of him being arrested where he's trying to kick the photographer.
Let him take me to jail. But you're not going to do that.
Wait a minute, Mr. Jones. Now listen a minute. I didn't know he was back here. He just pulls up. I ain't gonna have you start no mess with him.
Well, you tell him to get away from here.
All right, he ain't got nothing to do with me.
I'll go to jail with you anywhere you're going to go.
All right, you're gonna go with me, but you ain't gonna mess with him, all right? Come on, now leave him alone.
What the hell?
I don't know, but I don't
What have I done?
You are drunk.
I am not.
Yes, you are.
No, sir.
I want to come up here and give you some tests. I want you to leave this man alone, okay?
No, you tell him to leave me alone.
Okay, he's gonna leave you alone. We're gonna go up there where he can't see us. Come on. You want to lock the car up?
No, sir.
You don't want to lock it up?
No, you will run.
All right. Okay.
I haven't done nothing. I ain't got nothing.
What's that right there? George, hey, come on then, George.
We make a real ass out of this.
Wait a minute, David. Hold up. All right, kid, I don't want you straight up swing somebody.
And the cops can't even kind of wrangle them. They're trying to be nice because you can tell they're all fans and they're used to this. And it was a day where they didn't take DUIs quite so seriously. And, you know, they were just kind of, you know, they arrest somebody if they were drunk, throw them in the tank, and they let them out the next day or whatever. But, you know, that eventually hit a plateau where even George realized that he was completely out of control and he went into rehab. He said that was a time where he fought it. He said, I was in there and for a couple of days, maybe a week, you fight it. You don't want to be there. And he said he realized after a while, I'm stuck here and I might as well do some thinking. I might as well get something out of it. He said then that's when his heart started to change. And that's when he started to kind of see a life outside of the excess. And he said, and that's also when he happened to meet Nancy. He met Nancy and he said she was an absolute godsend. He said she was the first person that ever gave me a reason or made me see a reason to ever want to be sober. And so he would always say she was the love of his life. She actually just wrote a book. I want to get it. Love to hear her side of living with George Jones, but it says Nancy Ann Jones, no teenage boy ever fell harder for a girl than I fell for Nancy. When I met my future wife Nancy on a blind date in November of 1981, I had no idea that someday she would save my life. They say love can change the world. The country legend said I'm here to testify that it changed me for sure. Friends, family, doctors, therapists, and ministers had tried to save me, but to no avail. But finally, the power of love from one woman, Nancy Jones, made the difference and saved me. And that's quoted from George Jones. And it says, until his death in 2013, it was Nancy who George Jones considered his soulmate. So very appropriately, they would have this wonderful photo of them right there. A little further back from George's grave, because I wanted to show you that there's a grave right here. And that grave was actually George's longtime bass player, Johnny Paycheck, until Johnny broke off on his own and became a superstar. He played in George's band. And when Johnny died, he was pretty much flat broke, apparently. And so George paid for Johnny Paycheck's funeral and for him to be buried here, because that's the kind of man George Jones was. One of my favorite stories about George wasn't anything to do with the drugs or the drinking or anything like that. It was, you know, Tammy Wynette had been a hairstylist before she made it big as a musician. And so while she and George were together, she was the only person that George would ever trust to do his hair. So even though she would have people do her hair, before they went on stage, she had to go do George's hair. And one time her hairdresser was over at the house fixing Tammy's hair, doing her hair and everything. And George came walking in and he heard the hairdresser saying that her and her husband had split up and that her grass and everything got overgrown because he took the lawnmower and everything. She knew what she was going to do. And Tammy said that George tore off out of the house, and an hour and a half later came back, and when her stylist went home, said George Jones had mowed her entire lawn, cut the hedges, trimmed everything, done all the edging, made her house look better than it ever had before in her life. And they said that just happened to be one of his favorite things to do, was George loved to go out and work in the yard and do things like that. And so just as something nice out of the goodness of his heart, he went out there and mowed her lawn. The man that some say is the greatest country music singer of all time, real rebel rouser, mowed her lawn. Rest in peace, Possum. I know what he feels like. I too found the love of my life and feel like every day since has been a blessing, and I just can't imagine anything without her. So George, Nancy, may your love someday reunite. Thank you, Nancy, for continuing to tell George's story. Rest in peace, George Jones, the king of broken hearts. Have a great night, everyone, and goodbye.